Much of our work at the Schlechty Center is kind of going back and forth between the whole notion and concept of designing engaging experiences, not just for students, but for staff as well, and designing and redesigning systems to make it possible that that can happen with, in all cases, a clear focus on leadership throughout the organization. Teachers as leaders, designers, guides to instruction, principals as leaders of leaders, superintendents as moral, intellectual leaders, and school boards as leaders, community leaders, central office as capacity builders to build the conditions to make it possible that leadership can flourish throughout the organization. But much of the work here this week is really predicated on some common understandings about some frameworks that will be used, and one of those frameworks has to do with the 6 critical systems. And so I'm going to spend just a little bit of time this evening introducing you to those 6 critical systems, which are explicated, I believe, on page 6 or 7 of your materials. I believe it's on page 6 as the slide illustrates here. And as I do that, I want you to understand that the school district is an organization, your schoolhouse is an organization, and your classroom, if you're a teacher, is an organization. And these 6 critical systems are at play in every organization, regardless of what it is. And you hear people talk about, you know, we are system thinkers, or we have a system influence in our school district. But often what they are talking about are what we would call operational systems. And operational systems are different than these critical social systems. Operational systems would be such things as the human resource system, the financial accounting system, the instructional system, the accountability system. But those operational systems live inside of the context of larger social systems. And so that's what we're going to be talking about here this evening. And the first of those social systems is the directional system. And as I talk about these, I'm going to talk about them within the context of what they look like just a little bit inside of a bureaucracy versus what they look like in a learning organization. This entire conference, and indeed everything we do at the Schlechty Center, is based on a point of view. And that point of view is that the organization matters. And that often when organizations are very bureaucratic and top-down and highly controlled from places beyond your community, then what ends up happening is you drive out innovation. You drive out creativity. You drive out the joy of teaching. And so we always believe that the focus ought to be on engagement, not on compliance. It ought to be on leadership, not just simply working. And that it ought to be on an organization that needs to be transformed into something that looks much more like a learning organization rather than a bureaucracy. But let me say, we clearly understand that there are a lot of forces at play in your lives that are contrary to much of what we're going to emphasize here in this conference. So you don't have to tell us that. We know it. It's affecting our work as well. We also happen to believe that unless we change that thinking, we're going to lose public education. But we can't just announce it. We have to think about what is it we work on so that schools are enjoyable places that are focused on students and the quality of experiences provided to students that are much more about engagement, much more about the kinds of things we're talking about here, and we believe it requires leadership to do that. So when we talk about the directional system, it has to do with how goals are established. It has to do with what it is that you're trying to accomplish, either in your classroom, in your schoolhouse, in your school district. It has to do with the kind of support that you need from various audiences in order to be able to do that. It does include the goals, it includes the beliefs, the values of the organizations, those things that you care about, those things that define your organization and that make you different. It's really the DNA of your organization. It's part of the directional system. If you are in an organization, if you want to create a bureaucracy, then what you need to do is you need to create some mandates, you need to create some rules and policies and tell people to follow them. But if you want to lead the kind of organization that we're going to talk about here, then you'll be very much more focused on leaders spending their time on beliefs and values and vision and those kinds of things that have to do with how we have to do with the future and have to do with the kinds of things that we do to lead our organizations to be more about the future. And so you'll see that embedded in everything that we've designed for you here. The second critical system is the knowledge development and transmission system. This has to do with the means by which Knowledge is developed and knowledge is shared throughout the organization. If you could for just a moment think about the knowledge development transmission system being about three kinds of knowledge. There's the moral knowledge of the organization. The moral knowledge goes back to what the values, the things that you believe, the things that you're trying to accomplish, the things that make you different than other places. It's your values. The aesthetic knowledge has to do with how you do things in your organization. And so if you happen to be new to a school, you know, all of you came here tonight. If you've not been here before, you're trying to figure out what are the aesthetics here? How do I dress? Where will they let me sit? How are we going to, do things around here? How do we go about? Those are what we mean by the aesthetics of an organization, the aesthetic knowledge of an organization. Somebody told me here a little while ago, I'm going to be going on a trip next week. They said, when you go to that place, you better wear a coat and tie, because that's what they require. That's part of the norms of that organization. And so, those are at play as well. And then finally, there's the technical knowledge. And the technical knowledge has to do, well, how is it we do our work? And what is it I need to know and be able to do in order to be successful here? And so often staff development and often what we talk about in sessions like this have to do more with the technical knowledge than they do the aesthetic knowledge or the moral knowledge. And so when you think about the knowledge development transmission system and think about how can we design that system in such a way that people not only understand what we're about, but they become committed to what we're about. And that they work in teams and they work together more often than they work in isolation. All of that kind of lives inside of the knowledge development and transmission system. The third critical system is the recruitment and induction system. And this has to do with how you both recruit and induct people into the direction of the organization. Okay? Often we think about recruitment and induction being for new people. Those new teachers we hire, those new people in the organization. But if you're transforming your organization, there'll be a lot of emphasis here on transformation and what that means. Then we have to think about recruitment and induction for everybody. Because some of us have been around 25 years working in a different kind of organization, and we have to think about how do we invite people into the new direction and how do we induct them so they can understand how they can make a contribution that can help them be successful and help others be successful as well. And so if you want to create a bureaucracy, then recruitment and induction simply means you get people who see the world the way you do, and you bring them into the organization, you train them to do things the way you want them to do. But if you want a learning organization, then you got to think about recruitment and induction in such a way that people understand what the values are, and they also understand how their job, their role, what they do contributes to those things that you care about in your organization. Now, those first three critical systems are critically important because we believe that's where leaders live. Those are the kinds of things, those are the systems that leaders spend most of their time and attention on. But the other last three critical systems are also important, and we need to understand them because sometimes they take us over. One is the boundary system. This has to do, it defines who is part of the organization, how you get into the organization, how roles are defined in the organization. We deal with boundary issues in this conference. It used to be just for principals, and we expanded it to teachers. Now we're expanding it to central office and to other folks. Those are all boundary issues. So, one might argue that schools today, that the boundaries of school are under attack. We didn't used to have virtual education as we have in the case where Florida Virtual is such a leading example. We didn't have people who were proponents of charter school or vouchers or using public money to funnel to other kinds of organizations. We didn't have private online education, all the kinds of stuff that seem to be dominating a lot of the needs and interests of many in our country today, particularly because they're interested in some of the money that goes with it, are at play. And it's having a dramatic impact throughout your schools, throughout your organization. So how the boundaries are defined and how people work together or don't work together and how roles in the organization are defined, so that either people are part of or apart from the organization are all part of the boundary system. The next one is the evaluation system. And by the way, if you want a bureaucracy, and you as a leader want to control the boundary system. You want it to be very tight. You want to control who gets in, who gets out, and you want to manage that yourself. Whereas in a learning organization, the boundaries are more permeable. And you might ask yourself a question: do we want a public school or do we want public education? You know, what are we really about here, and how do we use these new emerging boundaries in ways that can help us accomplish what we're about, as opposed to simply seeing them as competition or a threat to the way we do business. The next one has to do with the evaluation system. The evaluation system has to do with how do you assign merit to what it is that we value. And in the bureaucracy, often the evaluation system is driven by those things that other people value, that are driven by external mandates, that are driven by your state house or by the federal government. And sometimes we forget that the word value is inside of the word evaluation. And if you don't know what you value, then you cannot evaluate. And if you want to be a leader in a learning organization, then we have to design the evaluation system around our beliefs, around our values, and around our vision. And we have to figure out ways that we can assess those things, and that we can assign merit and value and recognize and reward people who act in ways that are consistent with that. If you're in a bureaucracy, we see evaluation as punishing people. If you're in a learning organization, you see evaluation as a way to give people continuous feedback so they can continue to improve the way they do their work. If there's one thing we believe above many other things at the Schlechty Center, is that you do not improve by working on people. If people are not broken, systems are broken, and that we have to spend more time redesigning the systems in which people work and in which people are being asked to do extraordinary things, if indeed we're going to get the kind of results that I believe everybody in this room wants. The last one is the power and authority system. This has to do with how power is defined and how authority and status is differentiated inside of the organization. It's not that power or authority are a bad thing, it's that is power and authority used in such a way that helps us accomplish what it is we're trying to accomplish? You know, is power used to punish people, to put people in their place, and to differentiate roles in the organization so that people have more status in certain kinds of roles? In short, and many of us in our work with design teams, some of you have design teams, and one of the first norms that always comes out of a design team that comes together is, what can we say here and feel comfortable with? And one of the things that often has to happen is that we have to leave our titles at the door. Because if we don't leave our titles at the door, they will get in the way of the kind of communication and the kind of teamwork that is required in order for us to do this work. That's not to say that you don't pick them up when you go back out the door. But the person who is most qualified and is best suited to get the things done that need to be done is the person who ought to do it, not the person who is the executive director of da-da-da. And in many times in school systems, we use titles and we use those kinds of things to get in the way of the kind of collaboration that needs to occur. So if you think about these 6 critical systems as a framework, a heuristic, if you will, a way of thinking about your classroom, a way of thinking about your school, a way of thinking about your school district, it can be a very valuable tool for you.